Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to moderate a short debate on a very actual topic with the title Data Governance Back to the Future. Big data and artificial intelligence with machine learning are universal developments without frontiers, driving quickly the digital transformation. This will make new trust models necessary to apply to data governance before technological solutions are chosen and applied in the companies. This must and can be done by focusing on the very same underlying fundamental data protection principles embedded in the law in the pre-internet time. We will have a debate on the topic with two experts in their own fields, Philippe and Gérald. Philippe has a doctorate in theoretical physics. He has many years of practice with risk management and risk management software, essentially in the banking sector. He is now running his consultancy firm, LTHC, Let the Human Create, focusing on the managerial structures of digital transformation and research on digital identity. He chairs the board of trustees of the Geneva-based Human Colossus Foundation. Gérald has a master in economics and a doctorate in law. His doctorate research was on data protection more than 10 years before the LPD, the Swiss law on data protection, entered into force. He works as a lawyer in Geneva, has served in the Data Protection Tribunal, worked on various data protection legislative projects at the federal and cantonal level. He is also the chairman of the Independent Data Protection Control Commission at the ICRC headquarters in Geneva. I am Irena Leskovar, holding a master's degree in business economics and finishing a master in information security at the University of Geneva. I'm an information security specialist, working in the IT sector for over 10 years in different roles, providing technological, consulting, and managed services solutions to the clients from all kinds of sectors and geographies, helping them to successfully adopt digital transformation, protect their information assets, and grow their business and activities. So let's start the debate with the first question. Mistrust in current information system is felt at all levels of society. Digital transformation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, trust model, all this sounds complex and frightening. Gérald, as an historical expert of data protection, could you explain how we arrived in this situation and why trust is suddenly so important?
Well, if you mention historical, I don't know how far I should go back in the past to talk about the future. The Swiss Data Protection Commissioner used to call me a dinosaur of data protection, so you have the privilege of talking to a disappeared species. Let's go back to the birth of what is the protection, because this debate, we should go into the fundamentals. We won't go into the details, but into the fundamental principles. In Switzerland, it started with a famous case, which was l'affaire des fiches, when suddenly the population in the 1970s realized that there was data by the Swiss military stored on themselves when they were traveling to the Soviet Union. So that was a big shock in the population. Without this, I don't think we would have had, as soon as 1992, a legislation on the subject. There was no internet, at the time, there was only the big frame computers. It was not the world of interconnection we had today. Then we went on to Steve Jobs, 1980, the personal computers and personal computing, where 1980 we didn't have a law in Switzerland on data protection, which means people could gather, collect data, do whatever they wanted with them. We had only one limit, what was the right of personality, the right to a private sphère privée, which was a case law by the federal court, embedded in the civil code, but it was impossible, and no one would start a court case or litigation saying, well, someone has used my address and communicated my address in my football association to someone else, and this is a violation of my personality rights. First, because nobody would be sure that it was a violation of my personality right, and nobody would take the burden of going in a court case for such a thing. So, and then CERN was there, Tim Berners-Lee, and then they invented the web. However, they did it with they started by they wanted to exchange scientifically files. So they didn't think of security, they didn't need security, and they didn't think of identity of the persons. This came all afterwards. So I just jump situations in the history, but then we had the internet. In 1992, the Swiss law on data protection came into force, but only in 1992. A few things had happened, but there was no internet at the time. But the law basically stipulated the basic principles. They're right there in Article 1, and it says data protection is not protecting the data; it is protecting the person's personality and the fundamental freedoms of the person. So we should not misunderstand the term data protection in this sense. Data protection is the protection of the persons. So, and then came the internet. So we had to change the law. I participated in some of the events. And to cut this long story short, the internet made it necessary, because the internet is a huge global worldwide interconnection. So the image of the person, what this image can be digitally on the networks, became totally different. It became global. It became almost impossible to change it. And most of all, people didn't know exactly where the data was stored. So the law was changed on several aspects. But one was very important, because we'll talk about it later. It was not recognizable anymore. So recognizability, this is a term in English, has been introduced in the law, saying, well, this is a principle. When you collect data on me, I should recognize it. Now, Switzerland made it a little softer than in Europe, and said, also, when sensitive data is collected, you should inform me. That was also introduced in the beginning of the year 2000 and so on, because of the internet, because these were two basic principles. People had to be able to know that something was happening with their data, which was becoming their personal image. So that's part of the, and then we went on. Then we went on with Edgar Snowden. If you've read the books, there is nowhere to hide. So we ended up with this digitalization, the connections, and the possibility to identify people with a sort of a surveillance. It first went into the surveillance by the state. If you take Snowden, if you've seen the movie Snowden, I mean, it is the US with special programs wanting to survey. But then it became actually worse, because it was not only states, but just about everybody is surveying everybody on the internet, especially companies, advertising companies. When you go on the net, you leave traces, and everybody picks you up, and even neighbors are surveying you. And they're so easily surveying you because you're so eager to give information like this, put up your pictures, and so on. So you have this all that went beyond Snowden, beyond the states. This is the situation we're in. And where are we going? That's the situation we somehow have now with the internet. However, we've started, and we are going, if we take 2030, for example, as an endpoint, it's not the end, but I mean as a visual point, we have a fantastic development of other things. We have big data, all this data, but it's not just there. It is connected, it is being connected, no one really knows how it is collected. Our image, our personality becomes digital because it is profiled. We exist as profiles in various places. And we have artificial intelligence. Big data, in artificial intelligence, machine learning combined bring us into a different world. And this world is so different that we know if you tell a robot something important in the data protection law, that you have to deal with precaution and very differently with sensitive data. Tell a robot to tell you what is sensitive. A robot cannot tell what is sensitive. Sensitive data is about race, about political opinions, about health. If the robot has not been trained, he won't be able to say we are talking here about.
And data can become sensitive by itself. a data that is not sensitive to start with can become sensitive when it is combined with other data that are not sensitive.
The robot will have to learn that it is sensitive. Actually, there was one thing. The robots, I mean, let's call it the artificial intelligence with the machine learning, which the machine has to learn, has been trained to learn with the machine language. We'll talk about it later. They're much more intelligent, or they will be much more intelligent than the human brain, because they will be able to compute millions of parameters to come to a conclusion. So they are much more intelligent and much more detailed, much more precise, but they understand nothing. They will yield precise results, but they will basically understand nothing. So what we are going into, I don't know where I'm going over my time. No, I still have 2 minutes, but and then we have to. I have to leave in some time too. If we go ahead now, this was the past, the present, and the beginning of the future. If we go to the future, this is all going to go digital. In 2030 and later, we'll have lots of human activities that will be simply replaced by algorithms. There will be wrong feelings. If you take, for example, Uber, the taxi and Uber, some authors quite rightfully have called them, these are independent slaves. Why? Because under the cover of independence, the taxi, they think they have their own business, they are totally tied to a distant algorithm. Actually, what drives them and what drives their business are algorithms, not even people. Uber is just full of these algorithms. So this is what we're going to. We have special other situations. I had a few, I wanted to mention a few, but we have, just take the example of what everybody is watching. They have different marks of televisions, but just about everybody has a television in his living room. Many of these televisions are Samsung. Samsung has already stated there are no limits in the way they want to intrude. They didn't use the word intrude, but they want to be able to listen and to see. They can be cameras into this, and there are special programs by the US and the British to use these technical possibilities to do something, to be right in the home of the people, because everyone has a television. So there's this sense of developing, using the artificial intelligence with the despising limits, the limits we have put in the law. We have other things I don't have time to talk about, but if you can go into very far-reaching things, like if you go to read the people who talk about transhumanism, my God, try to imagine the Christmas party at home when you can live. I was reading a statement of Bill Maris, which is the head of Google Venture. So it's a venture, but it's Google, so it's a serious business. And says, if you ask me today whether it is possible to live 500 years, the answer is yes. That's what he said, not just anybody, not just people, philosophers dreaming. So imagine the Christmas party at home just imagine the revision of the AVS, the Social Security in Switzerland. In this, just imagine me, a young 65-year-old lawyer, talking and pleading in front of a 400-year-old judge. I mean, this. If you add these things, we have to talk about this too. Now, just a few last comments, then we might get to a few of the things I wanted to talk about. But people talk about innovation. This is a revolution. Actually, there's a problem, because I'm not sure it is a revolution. I think we have this development, big data, data lakes, and artificial intelligence. It's there. I mean, it's just so what is happening is not, there's not a decision by people to create something new. It's just developing and being there. And then people have ideas. So they didn't decide to do the technology develops, of course, but then they suddenly have ideas to do some applications. And actually what is happening is a bit of the consequences of the technology that develops by itself. It's not suddenly a big movement saying this is a revolution, even though people call it a revolution. So what we are having, and what we'll talk about in more details, is we're driving to what is called the economy of the data. So we are going to be living in a world where we talk about the world will be essentially data and in digital form. We're going to live under the laws created or governed by algorithms. That's the future. We are going to break away from what happened. What usually happened in the normal world. Just take my album, my photo album with my old pictures, physical pictures. This. It's at home. Nobody can take it. If someone takes my picture album, I'm not going to see it. It's not there anymore. Someone has stolen it. In the digital world, it won't be the book. It'll be all. It will be bits and it will be bits. It will be digital code. Someone can take it. I can't see it, but someone can take it and multiply this by 500,000. So it can exist in 500. So we have a problem. In the physical, we didn't have exactly the same security issues because I just needed to hide at home my photos. Here we have a different, because we have a security issue because these objects exist in form of codes. And this is going to be the big change. And this is the big change because we are going to need different legal frameworks and legal governance concept about this data, these codes, not only to protect them for security, but the person, which was the model of the rights of personality at the beginning, or at the creation of the data protection law, well, the person is just a sort of a code in this whole system, an image, which is, but the image itself is a code. And a lot of authors and a lot of people are saying, well, what we need to drive to, and this is going to be in the legal and governance framework, a big change. It changes fundamentally the legal concept, or a few legal concepts. It is we have to go from the protection of the personality to the property. The French author says there are two basic values in this developing world which will be essential. It is property and dignity. But we're talking about property, and one of the things we're talking about is to say, well, and to protect. It's not an issue of security, but you have these various codes that exist, objects in the form of codes, persons in the form of codes. You must give them an identity in order to be able to protect them, and Philippe is going to develop that, I hope, that point about the importance, the fundamental importance. If you talk about property and not anymore about personality rights, the question of identity in that sort of world. And I will just finish in just if you can look at the picture. Where are we now? If you look at the chart, we have the rate of change, which is a very fast one, on the left side, and then you have the curve of technology that goes just exponentially up. Then you have a curve which I called human acceptability, which goes up too, but much slower. And we are today already above the place where human acceptability is faster than the technology development. And I've done a third line at the bottom, which shows le droit, the law, which goes a little bit up, but very slowly because of the democratic process. So that's basically where we stand. So basically, and I conclude with this: we need to go back, and that's what we're going to be explaining in a moment. We to able to solve that future problem. We need to go back to the fundamentals of the data protection. How do you protect the people and not exactly the data? Since their image is just digital, we need to regain the control over codes, not about people and about object. Codes that go into concepts of property, not anymore protection of personality. We have to create for that digital identities. It will be necessary. And then we have to regain and organize legally and technologically the control over these identities. I've been a bit long in answering your question, but you talked about history, so I could have been longer.
Written a short history of
Data is digital, which means technological. The problems you have referred to are societal. Where do you see the solution coming from?
Well, obviously there is a solution, but we first have a big problem. This was supposed to be a debate, so a debate people need to not agree. And actually I agree with most of what Gérald said, but we're especially on the fact that we have to go back to the fundamentals. It's a big problem. Gérald has done an almost exhaustive list of problems, but each of them are scary enough to realize why are we doing that. So since we have to disagree on something to create a debate, I will maybe give a more positive tone to this, because I do think that there are something obviously technological, because digital is technology, so you can define as many laws, you can define as many changes in behavior of people. You have to understand the technology at the heart to understand what was wrong. Maybe we can fix that, and after it's going to be easier to address all these awful problems Gérald has addressed before, as mentioned before. And then Gérald mentioned the birth of the web, which was an additional layer of internet. Internet existed before the web, but the web managed to popularize internet. Internet was about connecting computers together. It was a few thousand people, a few specialists working together. IBM existed already at the time, so it was working, but it's really the web that made it to go from a few thousand people to 3 billion people. Today, about 3 billion people are connected worldwide. Well, that's a problem for the United Nations, because they want to have everyone connected, but that's a problem to go from 0 to 3 billion in 30 years, and with no really governance or structure that have been put in place. So we have to go back to that, and it's interesting to hear Tim Berners-Lee himself speaking about the web 4 or 5 years after its existence, where there were just a few hundreds of thousands or maybe 1 million people using it. He was already amazed by the wealth of things, of creativity he could see on the web, when there were just a few people. That was 20 years ago. So imagine now everyone is on it. So obviously we don't have the pioneers that wanted to use it, we have all the rest. So we have, and the problem is he created something that boomed over a structured internet that had a known problem. It doesn't have a built-in security layer, as mentioned by Gérald before. Now, obviously, humans are humans. They focus on the positives. They keep on building. No, yeah, we're going to solve this security problem one day. And actually, you see the first effort back into 1990s to solve the security issue on the internet. But we are still there today, and security costs have skyrisen. And you have all this data protection. But the problem is somehow unsolved in appearance. But if you go back to the root of the problem, then you realize there are things you can change. And if you change this picture, maybe there is a hope. And that's what I will be talking. I'm involved since a few years in that endeavor. And you have to go back to really the root. The root is about security. You have to realize that security is driving in our physical world everything, right from the start. Right from the start, when we were not even existing, we were just cells. A cell has to create a membrane to protect. It needs security. You need to have security to get the start. And then with security you can protect something which has value. And once you have the security to protect it, you can have some control about the value you want to protect. Now, so the thing to remember here is that security is the first thing, and then you build something that can be as complex. So I started with the cell, but today the largest corporation in the world, they don't have membranes, they have a set of lawyers around them to protect the corporation against everything. So everyone and every basis, if you think about it, you have to secure it something. That's what's happening in the physical world. And it works pretty well. I mean, it's all the defect, but it is what we have. When you move to the digital world and you say that security is an add-on, you basically already reverse the equation, which makes things totally different. So how can you apply rules on governance, on usage we have in the physical world directly into the digital world? And that's why you have so many problems studying AI, because there is no natural connection. And that could be already a problem, but there is a bigger problem in the digital world. There is no identity. The identity is not naturally there. It is natural there in the physical world. Why? Because something kind of obvious, we are made of matter, atoms, we are made of that. So Irena, Gérald are here. There are no way that they can be duplicated, disappear, reappear. They have a physical existence. this physical existence is a singular entity. They can be referred to. I don't know exactly your name. I don't know if you have a passport, don't know your nationality, but you have a physical presence. And this is an identity in physical space. It is natural there, it is there. No one can say, and it is controlled by you. You are moving around, you design. And this is around that topic that dinosaurs have built the sphere of privacy, which you are the center and you control this sphere, you control people in, you interact with other people. Well, if you can duplicate bits, you don't even have identity in the digital world. So if you have security built from the top instead from the bottom, you don't have identity. It is obvious that when you have an intrusive digital world, you'll create problems. Now, the good news, obviously, is that if we have identified the problem, a root of the problem, maybe if we just make a tiny changes in the root of the problem, we can solve many of these problems from AI, from the judges. It won't solve the problem of Christmas with your 600-year-old grandmother, that's something else. This is technology, but it actually will solve that you'll know she's really 600 years old, or not 605, which can create a problem at the dinner table if you get wrong with the age of old people. But you will actually be able to identify not only people, but also identify things. Because I said we are 3 billion on the internet, but actually we are maybe 100 billion, because you have to count the machines. Machines are all around us, but machines are also devices, small detectors, and these are by hundreds. And now with 5Gs, they're all connected. So they are part. And as bits, you look exactly like a machine. There's no differences. It's just the meaning of the bits that are different. So once you have identified that it's missing, there is an identity missing, you can start thinking, oh, if you can create this unique identifier, that is good. Here I'm not speaking about identity, it's about identifier. So you go back that and you find a way, and actually there are ways to create unicity in terms of information. It's via cryptography, obviously. It's very cool, very advanced, so it cannot stand in a 1 hour talk, so we won't speak about that here. But in the past 20 years, there have been dramatic advances in cryptography, so there are things which allows to define a unique identifier, which will be unique full stop, like you are unique as a person. And when you have that, you get back this unicity, you get back the feeling, have to build security first, then you're on your way back to get the solution. And to get the solution, it's rather easy. You have to look at what we already have. When we do a transaction, like I'm buying you a service from your company, there will be exchanges between us. You're going to ask me, if I'm buying something from you, I need to give you some credential. I need to prove to you that I can pay. Depending on the service, I need also to identify myself, but not always. Currently on the internet, this is not how it happens. You have to identify physically yourself with forms through Amazon. Someone is observing you because you have to get all these people around just to get the connection internet. If you get to a direct connection between two persons, which is private, in addition, we can exchange credential just between the two persons, and that the receiver of this proof or this credential can himself verify that the credential is valid, in the same way that a patrol officer in a foreign country can verify that your passport is valid. It doesn't call your government saying, is this passport valid? He just knows it because the security elements in the passport are sufficient to do that. That if you have this identity, this uniqueness in the digital world, you can recreate all that. So you can recreate the same type of transaction with the same type of usual role. The issuer of an identity, a passport, the holder of an identity, the citizen, and the person actually verifying that the identity is valid. And this sometimes triangle of trust, this is the technological element that is coming. And this technological element is actually supported by this notion that the verifier that is actually verifying what you are telling him needs to verify with the issuer without connecting to the issuer. To do that, he needs to rely on some kind of governance. Like when you show your passport in a foreign country, the foreign country has to recognize that this passport is valid. And behind that, there is a whole set of governance. When you show your credit card in a shop, there is a machine. In the past, it was not even an electric machine. It was a physical machine. Why the shop trusts your credit card because there's a governance between the credit card company, the bank. There's all these governances going around. It could be regulation. It could be sometimes even non-written governance like usage. And if you can all get this governance back into the system with this uniqueness and this feeling that you can start with security at the bottom, you get everything. And this is basically what is called today self-sovereign identity. It's giving back an identity and knowing that this identity in the digital side has to be used in a way that exactly matches what we currently have in the physical world. You identify something in the digital world uniquely, you can assign a value, and the person that controls the value is the person that controls the identity. And here, I should say even that it's the person, it's the entity that is identified that controls it. Because as I said before, this applies to machine, this applies to anything. So it's not an identity, a digital identity which you can compare like the Swiss ID that really identifies a person. It's really the identity down at the bit level, if you want, really the fundamental. And once you have all that, and that is made, that is really, this is coming live. Once you have all that, you can recreate a digital society that matches what we have into the current society. That means you can recreate sovereignty on your data, but a company can recreate sovereignty on their data, and obviously there is a certain sovereignty that can be recreated at the country level because the governances are different. And all this is made possible because there has been recent advances in cryptography. They are being able to use this decentralization aspect on these cryptographic keys. Cryptographic keys used to be something kind of hard to manage and to transport. But since a few years, they are easy to produce. Anyone can use it. Anyone can produce them in small apps, but you still needed a centralized key management system. Now, with decentralized key management infrastructure, that's the technical terms, this type of self-sovereign identity system can appear on the market, and they are here. So that's the concept. Security needs to be first, then you need to give a digital identity to any numeric and digital stuff, and then you can recreate a whole stack like you have in the physical world. And once you have this, you can come back with natural law because you can identify, you can assign a responsibility or liability to someone. And with that concept, it's amazing that actually it looks very complex, I know, and it looks a bit idealistic because then you have to change everything, but actually it's like the web. The web started with just interfacing a few scientists for their scientific data, and then you know what it is today. So it will have to start, I don't know if we can go in some example, maybe. That will be maybe the next part that will be useful to see.
We are under the governance of algorithms because I don't see the digital clock anymore.
Yeah, 32 minutes.
This SSI vision for rebuilding trust sounds radical. Can it be built and really contribute to the solution?
Yes, definitely it can be built. Technology started to be built. The problem will be its adoption, because the SSI solution will work if there is an ecosystem, if you have your own digital identity but it's not recognized by other shops or by other people, then that will not work. And also there is huge governance definition to be made. So the very encouraging thing is that the path of adoption has increased dramatically in the last 2 years. The first attempts to build an SSI system were back in 2016, where a small non-profit foundation called the Sovereign Foundation built actually the first, based on the blockchain, they first built the first public utility for identity. So it was a blockchain in which was containing only elements to capture the necessary information so that this whole triangle of trust could work, so that the verifier could check the validity of the statement given by the holder without having to touch the issuer. And I think their blockchain started to work back in the 70s. In 2018, the first commercial banks in the US started to look into it in terms of advanced research. And the amazing thing is it started from a small test pilot program to detect fraud into the call centers, and now it turns into like a global, worldwide global KYC. They want to turn that. So in 2 years, a small that these are real solution that is working. And then the big move has taken place actually this year, when from these initial tests on an existing network, these networks exist. You can go on them, you can use them today if you have any wish to attempt. Everything is open source, everything is available and work. So the next step is actually to make it work on a larger scale. And this has taken place. This is an initiative that has been carried out, that is carried out under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation. So it's a little bit harder to go bigger in that frame. It is a worldwide effort to build this governance. And to build this governance, it's a huge effort. It's amazing to see the foundation was created in May this year, and it has already 80 organizations participating. And among these organizations, you have the founding people like MasterCard, IBM are part. So the scaling is arriving. So that's the technological scaling, the governance scaling. But the most beautiful scaling I see is that government started to be interested into that. The Canadian government is looking some potential pilots. They are doing some. We feel they are interested. They are behind some of the proof of concept. The Finnish government has launched their own identity networks. There is an initiative called Findi. It's working in Germany. There is a LISI initiative that mix banks, startups, but the Bundesdruckerei, the minister responsible to print the passport. So you see that it's coming. People are starting to get to this idea, how we can change things. So obviously, this is necessary because that's the ground wave that will change the current thinking, because we have to face it. There's so much money made now in using your data, in monetizing your data, that the biggest holder will be actually the people who have the monetary power. Now, it's really difficult to change a business when you have the first 10, among the first 20 companies in the world, the first 5 are companies related to the internet, to data. So that's going to be very hard to change. But they also have understood that purely selling the data is not a business. It simply went too far. So going back to this very simple route, let's start with security. Let's give back an identity to everything in the digital world, so that entity control, you give back the control to an entity, and then the things will flow. So yes, there are things on way, and it's actually promising. But then we are hitting immediately the big governmental governance. Will the Chinese have it? Will the European has it? And in Europe, it's very encouraging because it's projects really supported by the European Union. They fund a number of projects to build this groundwork. So it's really exciting period for that. So I'm very positive on that.
If I there are a lot of things to say, but I mean, if I quickly just to conclude on this, there are a few things that are a bit frightening when you, for in my field, because I'm not sure I understand the technology. I see it. I see what has been explained. I see this development of the artificial intelligence as all these codes, bits we're going to have, they will be produced by the big data and this artificial intelligence. And that's where the problem is. If you try to do the governance and the legal governance, you will have right from the beginning, from the start, to try to introduce some constraints, some rules, and to force the respect of a certain number of basic principles. One of them, for example, is, there are a few of these principles on artificial intelligence, but one of them is transparency and explainability. Because these take robots making decisions. You're hired, you're fired, you get a loan, you don't know how they make the decision. I said before, they take a lot of parameters. They're much more intelligent, but they understand nothing. But the decision is taken, and the individual is affected by the decision. So transparency, what is happening, will be one of the principles, and explainability is going to be one of the principles in many things, especially in the legal, judicial field. When you have a judgment, you want to appeal, you'd like to know why the judge has come to that conclusion, because you're going to appeal and say, well, it should not be because he was wrong. You can't do that with a robot. I'm not saying yet that the judges will become robot, but if you throw the time stone far enough, you might have a few judges or a few robots that will become judges. You can't explain the process because of the machine learning. There's another principle, you can't explain it, so you can't understand it, and you might just be the victim of decisions which are unexplainable and not transparent. And that, if we want to remain, that's another principle, human-centric, we have to be able to see what's happening and to explain it. There are other principles, I was just mentioning one because we don't have time, but it's linked with this one, is fairness and non-discrimination. The machine, all these identities we have, we're like, actually that's a bit frightening because we are no more than just another sort of machine, just code among the machines. Fairness and non-discrimination, these are known, and we know approximately what it means as a legal or ethical principle. Well, the machine learn. There's machine learning. They take a lot of data. We don't know exactly how they learn. For example, if you use today the neuronal networks, like the model of the human brain, but done by the computers, they can learn very quickly. I mean, in one of the last of the AlphaGo story, the last one, using the neuronal networks, they taught a computer to learn to play chess, almost like a world champion, in 24 hours. So the computer doesn't know he plays chess. He cannot do anything else but play chess, this particular robot, but he learned in 24 hours. IBM had used 10 years to produce the first intelligence that beat Kasparov, the world chess champion, in 1998 or 99. But he used it today with the machine learning. It's 24 hours. So fair, but what is important is what did he learn? Who were the teachers when the machine learned? What did they give him to learn to read? What is the language? And in the language, I don't have time to go into details and examples, but they are biased. They're biased. For example, there are languages which are neutral, and when you translate, the computers will need to translate because they're going to take this from various languages. There are other languages where not gender neutral, so we'll have decisions with our sexist decisions. There's an Amazon case already where if Irena had been a candidate for a job in the security sector, with what Amazon, the robot that was used to do that, you would not have had the job just because the robot automatically rejected women because the computer learned along the thousands of criteria that in these positions basically you must have to have them. I mean, it's a bias. There are other biases like this. We have predictive justice, where we have already software already used in the United States to make judicial decisions about whether someone is going to commit a crime again, where you can see with the result that black people, well, they will be considered by the machine as more deemed to commit the crime again, just because, I mean, it's difficult to see why the machine does it, because you can't open it and see how it reasons, but these are the principles that it's going to be a nightmare to apply this governance and these principles in the world which we've been describing. Now, to conclude, just quickly, is I'm a bit frightened, but the good news, as Philippe said, this thing is called self-sovereign identity, SSI. So we have the identity we talked about, but what I very much like from the data protection point of view, if you just look at Article 1 of the law, the Swiss law, which protects the personality and the fundamental freedoms, and we said what is important is that we regain the control over our data in this world we have, a frightening world which we've described. Well, self-sovereign contains the word self, which means someone alone, without can him or herself exercise some control, and sovereign means control itself. I mean, so this is where, just using the terms, and I like the term self-sovereign identity because it sounds like regaining this. So this control over the personal data. So I have again, that was a good news. Personally, I think this is going to be awfully difficult, if not impossible, because if you talk about legal or ethical principles, they have borders. They are frontiers. The law, frontier of Swiss law is, I can see it from here. The Salève is beyond the front. It's French law applicable. So if I put something under, it's territorial. It's territoriality. It doesn't go beyond the law. The legal principles will not go beyond the borders. The ethical principles, they are probably even more important in that world. They won't go beyond cultural borders. So if you invite next year a Chinese professor, law professor, to talk about these things, you will see that there are cultural borders in the way you protect individual people. But the technology we've been talking about, the artificial intelligence, the big data, this is universal. This has no border. So we are running into a world where there will be competition on the military sector, on the economic sector. And what I'm frightened also is you can see that because of these discrepancies, territoriality and of the law and universality of the technology, there is the start of a competition, an economic, maybe even military competition. If you look at what is happening between the US and China at the moment, this is probably the image of a pretty not too distant future on the planet. That's sort of, it's not a political conclusion, but it's a conclusion.
Well, again, I will agree with your conclusion in all the terms, the negative terms, but I will not agree with the final conclusion. I have a more positive view on the things because self-sovereign identity, by providing this uniqueness in terms of the digital identity, gives a way to reconstruct security, so there will be clear improvement about this relation. Yes, it's going to be hard, and Gérald is totally right on that, but that's just the start, because that just says we know who we are talking to, but we don't know what we are talking about. And the what we are talking about is depending on some kind of universal data language that has to be developed. And this is the things that already is also moving. When people realize that, oh, I know with certainty I'm talking to the right person. Now, how I can define the process? And examples like real-time GDPR is something we are working on, where you have real-time consent on the transactional level, because in addition of knowing who you are talking to, you know what you are talking about. Not in terms of the meaning. Here I fully agree with Gérald. What the machine understands, that's a philosophical debate. I will not enter that. But real-time GDPR on the transactional level, it's not so far away.
Philippe and Gérald, thank you very much for the valuable insights that will hopefully help us draft the right path to the data governance by design. And dear audience, thank you very much for your attention.
I just renamed my law firm because this is an identity in the world.
Mm-hmm.